Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. So excited to have y'all for the second session of the second day of the People of Color Living with Diabetes Virtual Summit. So welcome to Navigating Relationships and Diabetes. We're going to wait maybe 2 more minutes, let more people trickle in, and then we'll go ahead and get started. So thank you all for joining.
Hey, Keon. Blast from the past. Good to see you.
Yes, well, hello. How are you?
Good, thank you. Thanks for joining.
Absolutely.
All right, Grace. Well, if you're ready, we can go ahead and get started.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Casey. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the States today or the world. Thank you so much for taking time out of your Saturday to join us. My name is Grace Silverio. I'm going to be the moderator for Navigating Relationships and Diabetes. And today I have the pleasure of working with Lourdes Laguna, who lives with type 1 diabetes, and Dr. Liz Cambron-Capco, who lives with type 2 diabetes. And so I'm going to let these amazing ladies give us a quick intro, and then we're going to dive into the conversation. But please join the conversation via chat, share your comments, thoughts along the way. So Lourdes, if you want to kick us off.
Yeah. Good morning or good afternoon or good evening, everyone. Good to see you. My name is Lourdes Laguna. I am half Panamanian, half Romanian, so Afro-Latina is how I identify, and live in Washington, D.C. I work in education and nonprofit management, and I have been living with type 1 diabetes for the past 18 years. In mid-November, I was diagnosed Thanksgiving weekend, my freshman year of college, and I now wear a Dexcom and a pump and just have the privilege of having all these tools to help me manage what still is a very challenging day-to-day experience with type 1. And I will pass it to my colleague, Dr. Pozo. Coco.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Liz Cambron-Capco. I have been living with type 2 diabetes for about 8 years now. I was diagnosed at the age of 23. So right in like the peak of me trying to make relationships as an adult. And I'm Mexican-American. So both my parents were immigrants from Mexico. So navigating kind of my relationship with distant relatives and my relatives here in the US, and that difference in kind of culture has also been an ongoing kind of development. So I'm really excited to talk about relationships today.
Perfect. Thank you guys both. So I don't know if you guys know this, but today is National Donut Day. I just found this out earlier today. And you may not even like donuts or want to eat one, but it got me thinking about like, what's your relationship like with food, right? When you think about being a Mexican American, Afro-Latina, like food is such a important, plays such an important part of how we share, we celebrate, show love. So I'd love to know how your relationship with food changed when you were diagnosed with diabetes.
I can
Whoever
go
wants to, yeah, go for it.
You're starting off with like the hard questions right away.
Dive in.
Yeah. So when I was first diagnosed, I think my relationship has gotten better because it's taken like very intentful efforts to work on it. But my relationship was always, it's either a form of punishment or a form of reward. And so it was a lot of, I can't eat this because now I have diabetes. So donuts, don't even touch them, right? And that's because of a lot of the stereotypes and stigmas and lack of education around what diabetes is. And so it was a lot of, I can't eat these foods. I remember being told like, well, it's because of all the tortillas that you've eaten, and it's your cultural foods that have caused this. And that's why, the majority of my family also has type 2. And so it made me like almost feel embarrassed of my cultural foods, which is really impacted my mental health, because I felt like I lost a part of my identity because I could no longer be Mexican American. I could no longer cook my foods because they weren't healthy for me anymore. And so whenever you restrict any sort of food, you end up binging it, because it's like you said, it's part of my culture. It's how I show my love. It's my love language. It's how my family shows their love. And so how big of an insult to tell your family, don't give me your love anymore, right?
Mhm.
But we don't see it like that. Our providers don't see it like that. They see it as, this is just a food. And so it has taken a really long time to realize that I can eat everything in moderation. There's no bad or good foods. There's just bad or good relationships with food. And I'm going to enjoy my cultural foods because I don't have it every day. I can enjoy it in moderation. And you can't have everything turn into cauliflower. Like, it's just not what works for me. And so I don't ever tell other people, completely stop eating rice, completely stop eating these things. Just enjoy the food when you have it. Be mindful of what you're eating and how much you're eating, and just enjoy it. So.
I love that, Liz. Yeah, that's so important. And if it's a grandma, right, an abuela that's like making your plate, they just pile it on. And if you don't eat all of it, like they're so offended, right? Lourdes.
Gotta eat all of it, gotta eat it, number one. Yeah, it's been, I mean, I mentioned I was diagnosed in college, and so I think at that point you're just even stripped away from all of your, cultural foods generally in an unlimited meal plan. But to me, I felt like I needed to employ all the restrictive rules and boundaries. So I loved apple juice growing up. And then once I got to college, it was like, I can't do that anymore. No more orange juice, right? Like, cut out all of that. I mean, to the point where I became like Diet Coke all day, every day, right? Which wasn't great as well. But I think I started to live in this binary of good and bad. What are good foods for me? What are bad foods for me? Which I don't think was very healthy, because then I started, right, like ascribing good and bad to my blood sugars when it was impacted by those foods. And I do not feel, for me, that that is a healthy way to be thinking about my blood sugars. So now, as I think about my blood sugars in terms of like what's helpful information, what's not, that's how I think about the food that I'm getting, and do try and like open up those restrictions to cultural foods, right? Like all the foods that my mom makes from her country, all the Latino foods that I love to eat, plátanos, yuca fries, right? And so just really taking the time to think about, okay, if I gave myself 30 grams of carbs, right? Like 30 insulin to match 30 grams of carbs here, like what did that do? What was the impact of that? And just giving myself grace that I can eat these things and I can handle them in the moment, or learn from how I handle them in that moment. So really taking an explorative approach. That's a journey, right? Like you're not going to get it right the first time, but I think like it makes me feel closer to my family. It makes me feel like I'm actually living versus, trying to live or restricting myself so that I can live. And yeah, that is the way that I try and approach it. I will say though, I am more plant-based now. So the way in which it comes into play now is like, oh, I can't have that. But it's less about my blood sugars and more about the choices that I want to make.
Really good. Yeah, I love that.
Can I also
Yeah, please.
So when I was diagnosed, I had just started grad school. So I was on a grad school stipend, which meant I was below the poverty line. And so I always remember like, all I can afford is ramen right now. And ramen is not a very healthy food, and it's just high carbs, high sodium. And so I remember I really struggled in the beginning with, I can't afford to eat healthy, but my life depends on it to eat healthy. And so just feeling very anxious about my relationship with food and what I was going to eat next. And even just not having time to cook, a full meal. It's just, what can I quickly grab now? So I think my relationship has changed with not everything has to be freshly cooked, freshly prepared right in the moment if you don't have time, but finding kind of different options that you can piece together a meal, or you don't even have to eat a whole meal. You can eat snacks here and there if, whatever works for your schedule and your budget. You kind of have to figure out as you go, but there's like no shame in using frozen foods or, microwaved foods either.
I love the idea too of snacks. I tend to graze throughout the day. I work remotely. And so I'm like, oh, let me grab a banana here, some nuts here, whatever. And I think like some of the themes that I've seen from my family is this concept that you need to eat like a big meal at each mealtime, or have breakfast every day, or have, everybody has their like ideas about what to do. But culturally, my family is always like, well, did you eat on time? And it's like, what is on time? Like there is no concept of time when you're working remotely, and or when you do have this like type of grazing attitude or way of being. And so I find that to be like a cultural norm that impedes like some understanding about how I eat, what I eat. My mom will also often ask me if I get a low blood sugar, she's like, well, did you eat? And it's like,
Right.
a low blood sugar, like Google it. There's about 42 plus reasons why you could get a low blood sugar. And so it's not only because you didn't eat. So I find like, more about like the thinking of food versus like the actual food that we eat is also cultural hurdles that I need to jump.
Yeah. Yeah. So that makes me think about like education, right? When you guys were first diagnosed, like you have this relationship with food and struggling, trying to figure out, what can I, what shouldn't I eat? And so when you think about your relationship with your provider, there's studies that show the stronger your relationship with your provider is, the more likely you are to better manage your chronic condition. Overall health is improved. You're able to advocate for yourself. So I'm curious to hear how you navigate your relationship with your providers. Liz, go ahead.
Okay. So I've had various types of relationships with my providers. I've had, good ones, not very good ones. When I was first diagnosed, I was just, given a handful of pamphlets and wished the best. And so that was really hard because then you turn to the internet, right? WebMD, and you don't know what's a credible source or not. So for the first 4 years of my diagnosis, I had no guidance really from my provider. And once I finally saw an endocrinologist, he never listened to me, which is always a red flag, right? If you feel like you're not being listened to, find a different provider. And so because I think of my cultural background where providers are like on level with priests, like you don't question them, you don't ask questions, you take their word as gospel. If they say this is what it is, and that's what it is. And so when I would ask for a continuous glucose monitor because my brothers recommended it, he would tell me like, no, your diabetes isn't that bad, you don't need one. And I asked a couple more times and it was just prick your finger 4 to 6 times, that's good enough. And I'm like, I work in a lab, I do research, I can't prick my fingers all the time, it hurts, you do it, like see how you like it. And he kept just telling me my diabetes wasn't bad enough. And so I didn't like the feeling of we're not going to make any changes until I worsen. Like that's not what I wanted. I didn't want to wait until things got worse. So I got another provider. And it was the best decision I've ever made because she actually listened to me. She got me the resources I needed. I think the biggest help that my provider gave me was helping me with like calling the pharmacy to figure out which medications are getting approved. That's too expensive. Okay, we'll find another option. But even just something as simple as that, like that's one less thing off my plate that's already really full. So being listened to, that made a big difference. And now unfortunately, I don't have an endocrinologist because in central Pennsylvania, there's just not any here for some reason. But having providers that listen now, I still feel like I'm making a lot of progress with my diabetes management. And I feel like it's a team effort now, not me being, spoken down to.
Yeah, that's such a great takeaway. Like if you have a provider that's not listening, you got to keep looking for one that is, and be able to find your voice to communicate and feel heard.
And it's almost like dating. Like you have to kind of see if you like your relationship with your provider. If
It's
not,
a great way to describe it.
just kind of got to dump them and move on.
Yeah, keep it moving.
I've dumped many. I'm like, all of that resonates. I've dumped many, and it is because they haven't listened. And I find it to be like, do you see me as a human and not just a patient? Because that's the part where the listening nuances come into play, where like you're not just listening for the diagnosis or for the blood sugar spikes, but you're listening for like, what's my lifestyle? How am I eating? How am I approaching this? What's my mindset? And I actually had a Latina endocrinologist, and I was so excited, like, yes, I have a woman of color, like this is going to be dope, like she's really going to understand me. And it was very like by the books, medical. She was sitting in this like big office, sort of like apart from me, and it just like turned me off. We didn't get anywhere. I didn't get any advice. I wasn't listened to. Interestingly enough, I don't remember if that was before or after my experience, but I'm going to even say his name, Dr. Michael Thompson. I think he's in Boston now, but he was my best endocrinologist here in Washington, D.C. And I'm like talking about him so lovingly because he provided that love in every single session. I was a teacher at the time, and he was flexible about when I could come in to visit him, right? So even though they closed at 4, I got off at 4, needed to get there at 4:30. He allowed me to do that. Then we sat like side by side with each other and like read printouts of all of my information. So really like combing through the trends and treating me as a learner, which I really appreciated, because at some point I don't want to go to the endocrinologist, right? Like every month or every 3 months. I want to be able to empower myself and do all those things myself. And I was very early on in my understanding of those trends, how to treat myself, how to temp basal, right? Like all of these like nuanced tools that one could and I think should be able to use on a day-to-day. So yeah, I really enjoyed that experience with him. I think I liken it to like a coach. And so I have sought out in my like periods of when I haven't had an endocrinologist or like maintained that type of care, I've looked for diabetes coaches, and that has also been really, really helpful in my own practice, and thinking about what were the tools that they taught me, how did they think about these numbers. So yeah, I think that those stats are right. Like when you have someone that you work really closely with and you do have that team, then right, like you can soar. And
Yeah.
you'll be able to see continued improvement.
That's awesome. I love that. Somebody in the comments wrote that pharmacists may also be a great supportive resource. I'd be curious to know if you have had any experience with some pharmacists that have kind of helped you navigate that.
Yes, my pharmacist is, and it's a team of pharmacists, right? It's not always the same one. I've always used like Costco or Sam's Pharmacy, so it's always kind of a smaller group. And I call it my cheers. Like as soon as I'm walking up, like they know my name, they're, excited to see me. And so it's almost, they're on the journey with me, right? Like their heart breaks when I can't afford a medicine just as much as mine does. And so they will sometimes go out of their way to try to find coupons to try to let me know, like, hey, we'll call your doctor's office to see what's going on. And yeah, that's such a big help. So I always take them treats for the holidays because I need them, right? Like you need them on your team. They're on your side. So it's my pharmacist has been a really big help in that sense.
That's awesome. Maybe you need to go bring them some donuts today.
I will.
I feel like it's National Donut Day like every other week.
Why not? my
I live in
gosh.
Washington, DC, so having a pharmacist is like an interesting thought to me. I'm like, I go to whatever CVS I'm around and tell them, hey, I need this. But I will say that there are like really kind pharmacists that, you know, will make comments of like, wow, this is really expensive. This is the most expensive I've seen. Let me go find a coupon, or I think that we may have a different, right, like kind. And I'm always really appreciative of that. But yeah, I don't have like a, maybe I should go to the same CVS and build a relationship with the pharmacist.
That's funny. So in thinking of, you know, these different resources, your relationship with your provider, whether it's a coach, a pharmacist, what about your partner, your friends? I was just in Adulting with Diabetes and was listening to a great conversation they were having, and something that came up was, do you know your neighbor? Right? Have you told your neighbor about having diabetes? Like, do you share with your coworkers? Curious to know about how you navigate those relationships in your diabetes.
I was on a panel
Did
yesterday.
I stump you guys?
No.
Okay.
I'm just like all the relationships.
All the relationships.
So I was on a panel at my grad school yesterday afternoon. I was getting a low blood sugar, and I started like eating a snack, and while I'm like responding to the question, I'm like, I think I need to stop responding right now because I feel a little incoherent. I'm type 1 diabetic. That's why I'm eating on the panel. And I think I say that to say, in any relationship, whether I know you or not, I'm going to tell you in some form or matter that I'm type 1 diabetic, especially if it comes up, right? Like, I'm not going to hide it, because I recognize that, you know, in whatever relationship, someone could really help me live, right? Like in a dire situation. But that brings up a good point. Like, did I make it a point to tell my neighbor that I'm type 1 diabetic? And is she wondering why like the 911 was here the other day to like check on me? But for sure with coworkers, I think like it happens, right? Like you get a high blood sugar or low blood sugar. One of my really good teammates the other day told me, you look really tired. And I was really tired, but like doubly, I also just had a high blood sugar. And so felt right, like drained, from many aspects. And so I just named that like, oh, and I have a really high blood sugar. This is what's going on. Yeah, so I think it comes up in so many situations, and not to use it as an excuse, but to build understanding that like, this is happening all around me all the time. And I'm thinking about it. I don't necessarily need you to be thinking about it, but I do need you to be conscious of who I am in this space and how I'm coming and showing up. The last thing I'll say is like, I can speak more about other relationships, but Liz, I'll pass it to you in 1 second. But one thing that I do think about when just like sharing generally that I'm type 1 diabetic with folks is just like advocacy too, right? So I go to a gym, and it's a strength training gym, and I've never like lifted weights before. So this is a whole new type of exercise. And as you know, that impacts your blood sugars differently. I used to run. In running, my blood sugar plummets after mile 5. In strength training, it soars all of a sudden. And I'm like, I don't know what's going on. But I had let the instructor know the very first time that I went that, hey, I'm not going to keep my phone in the locker. I'm actually going to keep it with me because my CGM is on it, and I need to monitor my blood sugars over time. And, you know, it's a simple thing and a simple request, but I have been at other studios in which that relationship went poorly. It's like, wait, why? No, that's going to beep. I mean, it was at a yoga studio, so I get that. And I'm like, I would rather you hear a beep than me like get, you know, be on the ground in Shavasana forever. Uh, I do think that it's like a point of just like helping people understand who you are, but also advocating for your life.
Absolutely. Yeah. Liz.
So when I was first, my relationship with kind of coming out with my diagnosis, I think has changed over time, thankfully. When I was first diagnosed, I had a lot of kind of embarrassment by it because of the stigmas that I did this to myself. So I would go to the bathroom to check my blood sugar. I would hide my supplies. And now, like, I look forward to someone asking me, like, oh, what's that thing on your arm? And like, let me tell you about this thing. And so it's like you were saying, it's this moment where you can educate someone, where you can advocate for yourself and for the community. So I always love being able to have those conversations. I think I have told my neighbor because we've gone out to eat. And so I'm like, if I'm sweating, this is why, because like I'm going low, so I might need your help. And it is that, not so much that you just want to talk about it all the time, but your life can depend on it. So it's more of for my own safety. And so the other person also doesn't like freak out. I remember the first time I had my first low with my boyfriend, now husband. He didn't know what to do, and I didn't know what to tell him because I'd never had a low before. And so now we have a plan of like, okay, we have juice boxes all over the house. We have, we're ready. Here's what you do. Here's my emergency glucagon if we need it. And so having those conversations is really important. And I don't know if I, could be as healthy with diabetes as I am if it wasn't for my husband being very supportive and not being a food police, not, talking down to me about you shouldn't have that, you can have donuts. And more of him trying to understand from my perspective, not necessarily just what's by the book, but like what works for my diabetes and for my body. And so he supports me in doing things with me. So we work out together in the mornings, and that is such a big help because I don't feel alone. I don't feel like I have to go work out one more time by myself. It's, we're working out together. So it's really kind of brought us together. And it's also brought me and his family together. So, another relationship, because his uncle also has type 2 diabetes. So him and I can bond now over this. Here's another resource you may not have heard of. Here's this new medication that just came out. And so his family and I are now a lot closer because we can help each other out in that sense too.
I love that. So this leads to another question I have, Liz. I'll start with you, just because you mentioned when you were dating your husband, like how soon did you bring up, hey, I have diabetes, this, I got to do this, I got to do that. Like how soon into the relationship were you like, I need you to know this about me?
I don't remember when I like told him, but knowing me, I would have told him right away because our first date was going to Olive Garden. So I know that we're going to be eating. So you need to know if, I have alarms going off or, why I'm maybe not drinking as much as other people do. And so I wasn't embarrassed by it at that point. So I just told him like, this is something I have. You don't have to worry about it. This is something I have to handle and take care of. So yeah, I probably just told him right away, but I can ask him when he gets home.
Good. No, that's good. That's good. How about you, Lourdes, when you're dating, how soon do you feel the need to mention, hey, I have type 1, this is my CGM, I have an insulin pump? Like, how do you navigate that?
So I'm single and ready to mingle. So putting it out there. I mean, pretty immediately, it just comes up whenever the situation comes up, right? Like I also wear my CGM very visibly, especially if it's nice out, it's gonna be out, right? Like sun's out, pumps out. I think like it is very typical to gather around food and to meet around food. And so first date, right, like is either an activity. I've gone on hiking dates, running dates, and it's like, oh man, I got a low, but don't worry, I've got food, I'm okay, we'll talk through it. And then you get to understand, like, what is your reaction to this, right? Like, are you frustrated? Are you kind and patient throughout it? Are you looking to understand more because this is a really big part of me? And maybe even looking to like debunk some of the myths that exist in your own mind around it. The best parts have been when I've dated people and they like take that knowledge and put it into action. So we went hiking once. I had my own blood sugar, helpers, and then I got in the car the second time that we went to go hiking, and there were a bunch of snacks on the passenger side, just like waiting for me. So sweet. One other date I went on, we were out to eat. My blood sugar was so high and it was like stubbornly staying up there. And I was like, I can't eat until this like drops. I'm going to go on a walk. And he's like, I'm going to come with you. So we tell the waiter, like, we'll be right back. We promise. We haven't even paid yet. And we leave things on the table. The waiter just is like very kind. And this person just walks with me for like a half an hour, just to like bring my blood sugar down. I think at some point we were on a parking deck and he raced me up the stairs. Like that's another motivator to bring it down. Just like the sweetness, the kindness, I think is what I, look out for as I think about like, how are you reacting to the situation that could feel really sucky?
Yeah.
Make it fun.
Absolutely. That's a great way to like weed them out, right? Like, how are you going to support me? What's this going to look like? So I used to be an insulin pump and CGM trainer. And I would start people on their medical devices with their partner, a loved one. And a lot of times they would, be very supportive, but there were some that were like, oh, I don't want this going off. There are going to be alerts, alarms, or they come back and they're like, oh, this thing is going off all hours of the night. Like, it's frustrating. So if you wear a CGM insulin pump, has anyone ever complained to you about your alerts, your alarms, and how did you handle that?
I dare them to. No, thankfully, no one's ever complained about it. And my husband sleeps like a rock. So unfortunately, he sleeps through my alarms, but sometimes I just have to wake him up, like, can you go get my juice for me? But no, I haven't had anyone, thankfully.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah, I haven't either. And I think I'm probably more conscious of it, where I'm like, I'm so sorry. Because it is annoying. I'm the one complaining about it too. I'm like, you're waking me up. I'm tired. And so I recognize like it can be a nuisance, but I don't think I've encountered anybody that has been, at least, has communicated that frustration to me, because I guess, for the respect of like, I know why you need this.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's good. Liz, I know you had mentioned that you like to hike. Lourdes, sounds like you like to hike. I know you've ran 2 marathons. So in relationships, when you're thinking about doing these activities for yourself or with someone, like how does your diabetes affect like spontaneity?
It sometimes affects it. Not because like I always have like my diabetes diaper bag ready, especially if we're going to go for a hike. Like I have my blood glucose monitor, I have snacks in there, I have a water bottle. So I'm always kind of prepared for adventure in that sense. But sometimes it's my sugar levels are too high. I can't do this. I'm too tired. So it's a barrier sometimes to physically be able to do things like that. But I usually try not to let anything or not let my diabetes really hinder me from doing things, and just being very flexible with how I do things now. I remember I used to get really frustrated that I can't do these extreme hikes anymore. Like I can maybe do a baby hike for like a few hours instead of a whole day. And my husband's also very supportive in that sense, and kind of gauging where I'm at in the moment, not necessarily looking at overall health, because it does change day to day. It even changes hour to hour. So being very mindful of where I am in the moment and making decisions based off of that.
Yeah. Very good.
Yeah, I would say the same, like all of what Liz said resonates. That I like try to be prepared for spontaneity, even though that like sounds like an oxymoron there.
Yeah.
But there are times where, right, like maybe I've had a full day and I'm like, I'm gonna go to the gym at 5:30, right? Like I close out Zoom and then I look at my blood sugar and it's dropping and it just feels impossible in 30 minutes to walk the dog, get my blood sugar back up, change, and get to the gym. So maybe that's not like spontaneity, but it is like, how quickly can I navigate all the things that are coming at me in life, when, you know, something is glaringly like in need to bring up your blood sugar or to bring down your blood sugar, because yeah, that could be dangerous as well. But generally spontaneity is out there. I think my thought too is like, again, living in Washington DC, or just like a city, is like there's a CVS like across the street, or there's a bar that I can go in to get some orange juice. So I typically don't feel like I'm at a loss for like being able to get the support that I need.
And
Yeah.
if I can be completely honest, I will admit that I sometimes use my diabetes as an excuse to get out of situations. Like sugar levels are not high, but they might go high. So I'm like, no, I don't want to go out dinner with, these people because my sugar is right. So I'm like, okay, I can at least use diabetes to my benefit in this one occasion.
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious. So that leads us to, that's a great segue to my next question, which is about intimacy, right? This is something that comes up, right? So like, how do you navigate that in your relationships? I mean, when I was training people, I know Lourdes, you used to wear the Medtronic pump with the tubing. Now you wear the Omnipod without the tubing. So just curious to know how you're navigating that.
Team no tubing. Tubing is so complicated when it comes to intimacy, right? You're like,
sure.
Me while I disconnect. So it can lead to some awkwardness. But yeah, I think like even with tubing, because I wear two devices, I think that can be just another level of vulnerability, right? Like it's already vulnerable to be in spaces with people that you're getting to know, and maybe if you even do know them and you're like growing in your intimacy, I just feel like here's another level of vulnerability that like you don't experience with many people, right? Unless you've told me I've dated a type 1 before. It's like, oh, I thought it was here the last time I saw you and now it's over here. So even things as simple as like hugging, right? It's like, oh, sorry, I touched it. And it's like, it's okay. Like hug me. So yeah, I experience it in terms of just like a bigger vulnerability, and another talking point of like, yeah, it's going to change from place to place. Ooh, does that hurt you? Does that hurt me? Just thinking through, yeah, just another level of things that you need to navigate when you're trying to just like live in a moment, It doesn't allow you to do that all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say definitely I think it was a learning curve of, if you like touch my CGM, it's not going to fall off right away. Like, I think for a long time, my husband was very cautious of like, I don't want to, be too hands-on, and because I don't want to hurt you, I don't want to hurt your device. I know they're expensive. And so it was, I think, finding kind of a good middle ground of like what we can and maybe can't do as much. Just being cautious of where it's at on my body. And I think nothing's more of a mood killer than like your alarm going off in the middle of having sex. So just knowing that, which alarms you can ignore and which ones you can't, I think is really important. And just being very open with that as well. So I don't think it shouldn't get in the way of your intimacy unless it is like a physical barrier, like tubing and stuff like that. Just being careful about making it work, because it is a form of exercise and we need to make sure we're healthy, right?
I like it. Thank you so much for being candid and vulnerable and sharing that.
I did
Um,
want
go
to
ahead.
say one other thing, Grace, that it just reminded me that sometimes I confuse, the highs of intimacy with like a low blood sugar, right? Like you can feel, I mean, you mentioned sweaty, Liz, but then also just like this feeling where you're unconscious or just like not sure of what's going on. And so oftentimes I'll have to like try and just discern in that moment, like, is this because of what's happening here? Or is it because I'm getting a low blood sugar from this exercise? So it's an interesting conundrum to be in, and definitely a mood killer.
Or an excuse, or a good excuse, right? Like,
Yeah.
instead of
tired.
that, I have a headache, I'm too tired, my blood sugar's low. Oh my gosh. So if you could share some advice like on how to best help a partner, family member, friend, best support someone with diabetes, what would you want to share?
I have learned to be very patient with my husband because I'm the first person with type 2 diabetes that he's ever spent, 24/7 with. And so understand that I might have to teach him to unlearn a lot of things while also learning new things. So being patient in that sense and giving the same compassion that I expect him to also have for me. And being very open and candid with him as well of like, I need some space right now because my, sugar's high and I'm just very angry. And so I'm not mad at you. I'm mad at my diabetes right now. And so I think that also lets him understand me a little bit better and show me a little bit more compassion in that sense. And I always let him know when I make new diabetes management decisions. So I'm changing medications. So I might have a lot more ups and downs than I usually do. So just bear with me right now. Or I really need more support with my nutrition. So are you on board with letting me take over meal planning and maybe not eating out as much, which saves us money. So he's always on board for that. So just making it a partner decision, I think too, also helps them stay involved and stay kind of up to date on what's going on. And I've even had him take me to doctor appointments and come with me if he wants, just so that way I don't have to play telephone and repeat what the doctor told me because I forget things right away. So it helps he's sometimes there with me to kind of understand things too.
Yeah, that's awesome, Liz, that you have such a supportive husband. And then, the patience and education, but also setting boundaries, right? It's important to set those boundaries and take time for yourself. That self-care relationship is important too.
I'll
If there's
also
anything,
add
go ahead.
real
Yeah.
quickly. So we're in this phase that now we're talking about family planning. And so that has been another, I guess, hurdle in our relationship because it's not just, okay, we have sex and we'll get pregnant and that's good. It's no, now I have to be on insulin full time. And there's going to be a whole change to my diabetes management that as a man, he might not understand. And as a person without diabetes, he might also not understand. And so I think that's where really keeping him in the loop on what's going on. And it has helped me and I think our relationship to really try to plan ahead as much as we can. So I know I'm going to have to get off all my meds and switch to a whole new regime. So let's try to do this as far in advance as we can. Let's make sure that we're planning, vacations ahead of time. So I know if I'm going to have to take insulin with me or not. So things like that really help too. But having those conversations early on, making those decisions and just being very open and flexible, I think is also a really big help. Just being flexible with what, if our plans have to change, right? Because diabetes makes plans change all the time.
Right. Yeah. Well said. Thank you for sharing that. Does anything you'd add?
Yeah, and the question was, sorry, I may have gotten just like lost.
No, just like what advice, you could give to friends, family members to best support
Yeah.
someone with diabetes.
Yeah, and I was like in my thoughts around, because I was diagnosed in college. College is like the time, right, when you are developing your independence. And so I felt like I had to deal with my diabetes by myself, and really had to unlearn that like no, I could have a team of support. People can understand, people can learn along the way, especially after 18 years, right? Like seeing you in different scenarios. And so the advice I would give is to like be patient with your type 1 diabetics or type 2 diabetics as they too like learn and journey through you know, all of the changes. I started sharing my Dexcom numbers with my mom, my brother, and my best friend. That felt more vulnerable than the alarms going off during sex, right? Like now they can see it very clearly at whatever point, and also see like, I guess, directional trends. And that was really, really scary for me, but eye-opening in the sense that they would check on me. And one, again, like if I get a really low blood sugar, they get an alarm too and would call me. So we had to make a system for, you know, everyone can't call me all at the same time. Let's do a group text. I can answer the group text, let you know I'm okay, I'm taking care of it. But I think the advice there is to like show your support, right? Not just like say it or be in the background, but show your support. And also be patient. I think, you know, there's times when my brother might text me and say, hey, I've gotten 2 alarms now, consecutive alarms that you're high. And I'm like, I know, I'm trying to bring it down, you know, like I'm frustrated too. And thank you for checking on me, but I'm like so frustrated. And I think at some point, like I didn't realize that I was mad at my diabetes, and I put that out on them. So really do appreciate that they have been patient with me and continue to be as I, again, just like journey through this as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. You two ladies are amazing. Thank you so much for sharing and your time. Thank you everyone who joined us. Really appreciate you all. Looking forward to Greek Life and Diabetes, which starts at 12:30. And then we're going to end day 2, our final day, with mental health and stigma and diabetes. So please stick around and join us for those. But again, Lourdes, Liz, thank you so much. And thank you everyone who joined us.
Yeah, thank you all so much.
Take care.
Bye, thank you.
And if anyone wants to go to the exhibit hall, they are having like exhibit hall hours right now. If y'all want to chit chat with any chat representatives, they should be there. But yeah, go check out our sponsors in the hall and see all the good info they have too. So thank you, Liz, Lourdes, and Grace so much for this conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.